Hello everyone. Thank you for coming back for the final session of the conference. Um, Unfortunately, we have a slight timetable alteration. Ambrose Itachi was unable to join us or provide us with a recording, so sadly that talk has been cancelled. So what we're going to do is move straight on to this, what would have been the second talk of this session from Jake Veasey from Care for the Rare, entitled Space, the Final Frontier in Captive Animal Welfare.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jake Veasey from Care for the Rare, and today I'm going to be speaking about the relationship between space and captive animal welfare. Now, while I'm going to focus largely on wild animals, I believe the issues discussed here can be applied more widely. Now, space is arguably one of the most important metrics by which the provisioning of captive animal welfare is judged, whether that be by welfare scientists, advocates, legislators, or the public. But new research from several different strands suggests that the relationship between the space we provide captive animals and their welfare is more complex than we might have assumed. And understand exactly how space impacts welfare is critical to improving welfare in the most effective way possible. Now, it's widely accepted that bigger captive habitats are associated with improvements in welfare, manifest in lower levels of stress hormones, fewer stereotypies, even expression of more natural behaviors and lower rates of aggression. And that's across a whole wide range of species. Even in this multi-species study where we corrected enclosure size for body length and speed of travel, we found larger habitats were associated with lower rates of abnormal behaviors. However, we can't assume this is due to the impact of space alone. It could result from the impact of covariant factors such as variation, complexity, or choice. And this nuance really matters because we might be more able to improve factors that covary with space like complexity and choice more than we can increase space itself. And by understanding the true welfare drivers, we can be more targeted in our welfare improvements. However, understanding exactly how space impacts welfare can be a challenge, especially in non-experimental settings such as in zoos. Conventional welfare assessments in zoos often struggle to accurately identify cause and effect with granularity due to the impact of these covariant factors, as well as small sample sizes and limited experimental control. Now, zoo-based welfare assessments also crucially cannot assess the value of opportunities that are absent in captivity, such as migration, hunting, deep diving, and countless more. Now, the Animal Welfare Priority Identification System was developed to help identify our welfare priorities with more precision, unconstrained by these limitations of the captive environments. It's based on the relationship between evolution, motivation, and animal welfare. In essence, behaviors and cognitive processes of high evolutionary significance are either highly or frequently motivated or both. If they are also driven by internal stimuli, which can emerge regardless of the animal's surroundings, and animals are frustrated in expressing them, the welfare impact of that frustration will be broadly proportional to their evolutionary significance. And so, using a Delphi method, a diverse expert panel, we assess behaviors and cognitive processes against 16 criteria that provide insights into the motivational characteristics and evolutionary significance of these behaviors and cognitive processes, whilst also referencing known welfare impacts where they have been established. Algorithms are applied to that raw data, which ultimately yield a welfare significance value to help guide management and facility design. Now, we've undertaken multiple of these assessments across a wide range of species, and an emerging trend is the consistently high ranking of intentional travel as a key welfare priority, which seemingly reinforces the importance of space. And perhaps the most interesting and illustrative example relates to our work with tigers. Currently, captive tiger management and enrichment focuses heavily on hunting-related behaviors, and yet stereotypies remain persistent and widespread. Now, the Animal Welfare Priority Identification System, which is able to assess behaviors and cognitive processes with a granularity, has revealed that behaviors linked to travel are more important to tigers than hunting, reflected in their higher ORPIS value. Now, this was surprising at first, but it's actually quite logical. Tigers have a flexible relationship with hunting. In the wild, they can steal or scavenge food, and in captivity, they are fed directly. And regardless of how they acquire food, so long as each meal is big enough to stretch the stomach wall, it, that triggers the satiation of the desire to seek hunting and feeding opportunities. However, maintaining a territory and all that that entails, including intentional travel, are persistent, evolutionary significant needs. And this may explain why tigers pace. Captivity is frustrating, purpose-driven travel, and because meal sizes are reduced to increase enrichment opportunities, tigers also remain motivated to seek food in environments where they have no control over it. And so, by failing to recognize the importance of travel and misunderstanding the significance of hunting and how meal size impacts the motivational states of tigers, zoos and sanctuaries may have systematically done more harm than good through misguided enrichment programs. And the importance of purpose-driven travel is not unique to tigers. Across the wide range of species that we've assessed that are as diverse as polar bears and orangutan all the way through to elephants, it ranks the third most important welfare priority shared across these species, and the highest that isn't a direct physiological necessity. Now, more than a decade before we started uncovering the potential relationship between travel and captive welfare, Clubb and Mason made the case that amongst carnivores, home range size in the wild was closely linked to rates of stereotypies in captivity. This appeared to suggest that habitat compression is a key driver of reduced welfare. Now, this finding is not inconsistent with our own on the importance of intentional travel, and collectively might suggest that increasing the size of captive habitats would improve welfare. However, it's questionable whether the marginal increases in space achievable in most captive scenarios could be sufficiently impactful in transforming captive animal welfare. And importantly, Georgia Mason's group has also recently expanded this data set and revised their previous conclusions with some important ramifications in this area. When they looked at and corrected for nomadism, they discovered home range side had no effects on rates of stereotypies amongst carnivores, and that it was in fact nomadism that appeared to be predictive of rates of stereotypies in captivity. Now, nomadism is a measure of the proportion of the animal's annual range covered each day. So, highly nomadic species such as polar bears, which cover less than 1/10 of a percentage of their habitat per day, are highly stereotypic in many captive scenarios, whereas a more sedentary species such as a red fox that could cover all of its home range in a day show lower levels of stereotypies. And they subsequently concluded it's actually variation and the opportunity for choice encountered daily in the wild that are more influential than habitat compression in influencing captive welfare outcomes. In other words, it's qualitative factors of the captive environment may be more important than the quantitative factors. However, habitat size and variation can't be easily separated, and this story is even more nuanced when we consider the relationship between home range size and daily travel distance in more detail. This log scale figure illustrates the huge variation in home range size amongst species for which captive space is routinely considered a welfare concern. For example, the wild home range sizes of Amur tigers can vary by over 150-fold, polar bears by 600 times, and Asian elephants by over 1,000-fold. Now, while even the smallest wild ranges for these species significantly exceed even the biggest of captive habitats, these animals seem to have some innate flexibility in terms of their spatial requirements. However, it's important to recognize that daily travel distance and home range size are two very different variables, as illustrated by the tracking data from these three southern African elephants, where daily travel distances are relatively consistent between them, but where home range sizes vary considerably. And when we compare daily travel distance in the wild and in captivity, we see they are often more similar than we might have imagined, considering the comparatively restricted opportunities and need for travel in captive environments. And in the case of polar bears, where much of the daily travel distance in captivity can be in the form of stereotypies, daily travel distance in captivity can exceed that routinely seen in the wild. Tentatively, it seems that animals have a more flexible relationship with space than they do daily travel distance. This is broadly consistent with the work of Bandele et al. On nomadism, as well as our own AURPIS-derived findings on the importance of intentional travel, all of which collectively point to the fact that the cognitive and behavioral opportunities associated with travel might matter more to a species' welfare than the volume of space the animals have access to. Captivity seemingly limits opportunities linked to travel more than it does the distance traveled, which points us to very different solutions than we might have envisaged based on simply increasing the volume of space alone to captive animals. But before exploring solutions, let's consider why travel might be so important to captive animal welfare. In the wild, all travel is intentional. It's the precursor to motivational equilibrium, the behavioral and cognitive glue linking choices to action and motivated outcomes. Activity doesn't limit travel, but it restricts the opportunities linked to it, such as choice, variation, and importantly, purpose. We provide animals the resources they need, but not the means to achieve them, including, and perhaps most importantly, travel. And so increasing space alone and changing nothing else may not improve welfare to the extent that we would hope. And so instead, we need to focus on the quality of travel we're providing animals as well. And to reflect this emerging need, we distinguish meaningful locomotion from aimless movement, or stereotypic behavior, which dominates so much of captive travel. We define that as the ability of animals to undertake journeys to and from biologically appropriate places, circumstances, and opportunities of their choosing, comparable to those made in the wild. So what might this mean in the real world? Returning to tigers, modern zoo and sanctuary habitats are largely designed to accommodate rather than eliminate pacing, with maximum journey times being less than 2 minutes and entirely without purpose. Now, right now, we're attempting to reconnect travel for tigers to self-selected, biologically relevant, motivated outcomes. As I speak, we are nearing completion of a tiger habitat capable of responding to the choices made by tigers. Geographically discrete, species-appropriate opportunities are linked by dynamic forest trails, which when combined with programmable olfactory, visual and auditory cues, enable us to create an extensive pathway network that tigers can learn, navigate and make complex, meaningful decisions in, such as whether to walk 2 kilometers to water or 3 kilometers to a feeding or social opportunity, signaled by imperfectly reliable cues reflecting natural contingencies. This isn't just about increasing maximum journey time, it's about reconnecting meaningful locomotion to motivated, self selected outcomes. This project, which has been more than a decade in the planning, is, we believe, the most complex interactive environment ever created for any captive animal. And the technology embedded in the habitat, which has been developed by a team of leading interactive technologists, will also help provide unprecedented monitoring of health, welfare, and activity levels. Due for completion this summer, this tech will help measure the impact of the habitat on tiger welfare, and we hope the results could transform how we address the issue of space for all species subject to habitat compression in captivity. To summarize, the relationship between space, travel, and welfare is more complex than was previously thought. While habitat size is a key metric of habitat quality, overall quality is more significant in terms of welfare than size alone. Captivity compresses the amount of space available to animals, but doesn't appear to constrain the distance traveled. In the wild, travel is a precursor to motivational equilibrium, but captivity effectively disconnects travel from motivated outcomes and opportunities. Indeed, since animals have evolved to be conservative in their use of both time and energy, excessive travel without purpose in captivity may be a sign of impoverished welfare. Reconnecting travel with choice, purpose, and naturally motivated opportunities may be essential to good animal welfare. And work is underway to do exactly that, to provide meaningful locomotion opportunities across a range of species and evaluate its impact. And we think that could transform how we approach the welfare impacts of habitat compression across a range of species. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you want to turn your camera on, we've got some questions accumulating in the chat box. Hi, Jake.
Right.
So I'm gonna steal Chair's privilege. I think a lot of people who saw that Club and Mason research all those years ago concluded that there were probably some species, and I think we're probably thinking polar bears here, that you just couldn't meet the needs of in captivity. Does that change your view? Do you think you could meet the need of any species if you put enough of this approach in there?
I personally think theoretically anything's possible. In reality, the reality can be quite different when we get down to sort of practicalities and cost. I think one of the interesting things about polar bears is they are like all animals, but perhaps even more so because they are on a metabolic knife edge. They are very conservative in their energy use. And so, when northern indigenous people kill a whale and that carcass is brought on shore, um, and obviously in the high Arctic that doesn't rot quickly. Polar bears can become quite sedentary and they can even become quite social, and we see this around human refuse tips as well. So they are able to adapt their behavior to the scenarios. One of the challenges we see with captive polar bears is this lack of nuanced understanding of the entirety of their sort of behavioral ecology. So we scatter feed polar bears in the same way that we would scatter feed brown bears. And so we're kind of forcing them to move around and pick up small treats. And yet their behavioral ecology is to move to optimal feeding locations, become quite static, and then consume these very large meals. So it's definitely not as simple as just the space. It's everything else that connects um, that connects these behaviors and cognitive processes together. But travel is the key one that I think we've overlooked. And so it's reconnecting travel to the other motivated behaviors and cognitive processes for species. And the same is obviously true for polar bears. So I think it can be done, but I think, big field with a nice lake in it is not the end point of where we need to get to with polar bears. There's a lot more that needs to be done than simply adding that space.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, very good point. Um, Question from Bas Rodenburg here. Apart from space allowance, what role does feeding method and or timing play in zoo-housed carnivores? And then is pacing not seen more around feeding time?
Yeah, absolutely. Pacing, we're preparing for the post-occupancy analysis on the impact of this habitat that we're developing, and we are distinguishing at least kind of three levels of stereotypy. There's the in tigers. The anticipatory stereotype is the just general day-to-day kind of boredom related stereotype is in inverted commas, but also we are recognizing just this behavior that may not appear stereotypic as you look at it, but in retrospect serves no purpose and may be stereotypic in the way that it geographically kind of manifests over time. Um, what we have also previously recommended is the approach of the 6 days a week feeding for tigers is predisposing them to welfare challenges because they are permanently motivated to seek food. The number of zoos that have embraced the a much more natural feeding contingencies with 20% of a tiger's body mass fed roughly twice a week have seen reductions in stereotypies. Unfortunately, they've contacted me and told me how pleased they are with the results, but they never collected the data to demonstrate that. So anecdotally at this stage, absolutely, the manner in which we present food does have a profound impact, and stereotypies are not a uniform single um, uh, a simplistic phenomenon. They can have multiple causalities and manifestations.
Got a question from Paul Rose, which I think is partly related to that. So it's nice saying thank you for the talk. How do you define purpose-driven or intentional travel, and how can this be identified compared to it? How can this be identified in the zoo compared to regular movements between resources in the enclosure? And as a follow-up, is locomotor stereotypy the way a captive animal attempts to do intentional travel, or is that something different?
Hate it when people give three questions at once, because by the time
Yeah,
I've finished
sorry, I
one,
should
I've
have split
forgot
it
what the
up.
third question is. So the
Okay.
definition of intentional travel stroke meaningful locomotion is given in one of the slides in the presentation. But um, the second question was what was it again? Sorry.
How can you identify purpose-driven or
Yeah.
intentional travel in the zoo
So
environment compared to regular movements?
yeah, so this is one of the things that we've spent quite a bit of time discussing it, and what I would say is, we often undertake sort of behavioural analysis at that, the scan sampling, you record the behaviour at specific intervals. Even stereotypic behaviour, which is so kind of widespread in terms of sort of our usage of it, our ability to identify it and reference it, you cannot tell that a behavior is stereotypic at the instant of it being sampled. If you took 1 second of a tiger moving, you can only judge it as stereotypic by looking at it in the context, what preceded it and what went after it. And we've had to apply the same kind of approach to intentional behaviors, monitoring what the tigers are moving towards or away from. So, like I say, there's lots of aimless travel, there's stereotypic travel, and then there are moving towards a den, moving towards, some stimuli, either inside or outside the environment. So it's ensuring that there is that ability to look at the broader context, which in reality we've got very used to doing for stereotypies, and we just need to get our head around this new concept in terms of intentional travel. I think that the key point about this whole issue of intentional travel is we assume activity is always good. And certainly the activity levels we're seeing in polar bears, whether it's necessarily stereotypic or not, appear to be abnormally high. So I think as a minimum, we need to be a little bit cautious about that activity level. It may simply be down to the fact that there's more resources, and so they don't have to be as kind of frugal in their energy use. And the same is true of time. They have more kind of time available to them. But I think we need to be a little bit cautious in interpreting that activity level as a positive thing. But the reality is, wild animals are traveling with purpose. They don't waste time, they don't waste energy. And yet, in captivity, there is very little opportunity for animals to travel with purpose. And yet, the levels of travel we see are very high. So there is that there seems to be a greater flexibility in terms to spatial requirements than there are travel requirements. And I just, at this stage, I mean, this is very kind of early, early in the sort of thinking there. I think that in itself is quite noteworthy. And hopefully what we're doing over the coming years is drilling this down a bit more further.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, come back and tell us more when you know more. That'll be really interesting. Just one very quick one from Marie Roche Pons, who said, "Do you think it's feasible for zoos to meet the needs of the different species in terms of choice and challenge, as shown in the tiger example? Could there be alternatives in terms of cognitive enrichment rather than food enrichment?" So I guess could there be something more
Yeah,
simple?
so I think, I, one of my slight frustrations with the sector is, and frankly, the welfare, the sort of interface between animal welfare and zoos is the tendency to sort of jump on kind of buzz areas and sort of look at focusing on the area as delivering the solution. So choice, complexity, enrichment, these are all kind of just nebulous little clusters that are assumed to be positive for welfare without really thinking about the sort of the detail of how that manifests and it impacts the animal's welfare. So getting back to the point raised there about choice, we view all of these welfare priorities as important, but they cannot be addressed in isolation. So simply providing an animal a choice that has very little kind of impact or meaning, I think is not adding to an animal's welfare. Whether you eat an apple that's 1 meter away or a pear that's 2 meters away, that choice is kind of meaningless. But presenting tigers with choices as they are, the nature of the habitat that we're building, it has discrete physical locations. So there is only access to water in one discrete location, and we may signal a feeding opportunity in another location. And the distance between these 2 points we can engineer to be several kilometers long. Suddenly the animal is presented with a choice that has consequences. It can fail, it can make bad decisions, it's really thirsty, but it wants that 30% chance to access food, and it goes there and it doesn't succeed that. And I think, in providing animals the opportunity to fail is also important because it elevates the value of choices where they make better choices. So it's not just about these binary simple choices, it's about integrating all of these other welfare priorities into choices. And the same is true for complexity. Complexity means nothing unless it's species appropriate and it integrates with something wider beyond that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for those really comprehensive answers and a really fascinating new approach. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us for what was very early in the morning for you. We'll move on to the next talk now, but thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
Jake. The honour of having the last but very much not least talk goes to Bas Rodenburg, who's going to be talking about validation of a smart camera system for animal welfare surveillance in the slaughterhouse.
Hello, my name is Bas Rodenburg, and today I want to present the study The Validation of a Smart Camera System for Slaughterhouse Surveillance, a study that I conducted together with colleagues Annemarie Baars and Giersberg from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. If we look at slaughterhouse surveillance, the most common system that is used is conventional slaughterhouse surveillance, where human inspectors have to oversee welfare issues around slaughter. And the challenge there is that inspectors are limited in number and often also in available time. Inspectors commonly have to oversee a large slaughterhouse facility, and inspectors have multiple responsibilities. They have to oversee animal welfare aspects, but also have to safeguard food safety during the slaughter process. So they are needed in different parts of the slaughterhouse. They can be supported by conventional camera systems, so CCTV systems, but basically this presents the same time constraints because they still have to review the footage that has been collected, and they can only review a limited amount of footage available. In recent years, smart slaughterhouse surveillance systems have been developed. These are typically camera systems, potentially combined with other sensors, that oversee the different stages within the slaughterhouse. And a smart camera system is continuously monitoring the process. And in case of deviations of normal, so when situations are detected that are deviating from the normal process expected, the footage is recorded and stored in the system for evaluation. And basically only the footage is recorded where potential deviations are observed. And then also in the system that we evaluated in this study, the operator at the slaughterhouse has to evaluate the footage and has to take action in case of true positives. The system that we evaluated in the current study was the AI for Animals system. It has been developed by Deloitte together with Vion and the NGO's Dierenbescherming and the Dutch Society for Protection of Animals and Eyes on Animals. And the system is focusing on detecting the different phases of the slaughterhouse process. For instance, here you see a video at unloading where the pigs are detected, the humans are detected that are in the same picture, and also objects like a stunning device or a device that can be used to drive the pigs can also be tracked by the system. Here you see some screenshots from the system focusing on monitoring of deviating patterns. In the left hand picture you can see the pigs that are tracked with the blue bounding boxes, the humans in the red bounding boxes, and they cannot be recognized individually, and also objects like the mobile stunning device marked in green in the background there can also be tracked by the system. And you can imagine that there is a normal flow of animals and people in this part of the slaughterhouse where the group of pigs calmly moves through the runway, the people follow behind, and the mobile stunner is not moving. You can also imagine situations where something deviating is happening, like pigs staying behind, humans moving between the pigs, the mobile stunner being moved, and those are then the patterns that you would like to detect in this area of the slaughterhouse. And for each area of the slaughterhouse, you can define a normal pattern of events and a deviating pattern, and that's basically how the system is trained and operates. Of course, if you use a system like this, you also need to validate the system, because there is at the collection stage, where the data are collected, there is no human oversight. So is this AI system, the smart AI system, really measuring what it is supposed to be measuring? Does it miss certain detections that would result in false negatives? Does it collect many irrelevant detections? Then it would result in many false positives and basically leading to extra tasks for the person that has to review all the footage. So to get to the bottom of these questions, we need to compare the outcome of the algorithm with a golden standard. And in our case, those were detailed human observations. So we performed a validation study where we focused on two relevant indicators. The first one was the use of the low voltage electrical prod at the entrance to the electrical stunner. In this case, the slaughterhouse where we performed the validation study used electrical stunning, and the use of this low voltage electrical prod in this area was relatively common. So we were able to collect quite a large number of events that we could evaluate and where we could compare human observation to the detections by the system. The second event that we focused on was signs of life before entering the scalding tank. So this would be after stunning and bleeding, where pigs are not successfully bleeded and are not dead before they enter the scalding tank, and they will respond to this. This is an event that is luckily very rare, but it's also very severe, of course, when this happens. So on the rare occasion that it happens, you want to be sure that you are detecting this behavior. First, for the use of the electrical prod, we used 20 videos of 10 minutes each of the stunning area. They were analyzed by a human for either holding or not holding the electrical prod. So whether the human standing there had the prod in hand or not. The protocol that we used was similar to the protocol that was used to train the algorithm, and we used the same detection area close to the stunner. In total, 461 events were detected in this footage, and for these events we calculated the accuracy, the sensitivity, the specificity and the precision of the system. So here you can see the results for the use of the electrical prod. On the horizontal axis you see the gold standard, so the trained human observer, and on the vertical axis the performance of the algorithm. In 39.7% a true positive was detected, so both the human and the system detected the person holding the prod. In 43.2% true negatives were detected, both by the human and by the system. If you add these up, in about 83% of cases, either a true positive or a true negative was detected by the system. In 8.4% of cases, the algorithm detected the behavior but not the human, so these were false positives. And in 8.7% of cases, the human did observe the behavior but the algorithm did not, leading to 8.7% false negatives. So for the use of the electrical prod, that led to the following validation indicators: an accuracy of 83%, a sensitivity of 82%, specificity of 84%, and a precision of 82%. And when you look at the false positives, they were 8.4% of cases. They will be seen by the operator because they are detected by the system as potential positives, and then they will be removed by the operator, and the operator can also select them to send them to the developer to train the algorithm further. 8.7% of cases were false negatives. These are missed by the system, but it's good to keep in mind that the system applies continuous monitoring and that the system will still miss far fewer events than the human observer. Because if you remember, the human observer will only watch the process for a limited amount of time. So even when some observations are missed by the camera system, it will still be a much larger number of detections compared to traditional human observation. When we look at signs of life before the scalding tank, as I indicated, this is very rare. We induced it by stimulating the carcass briefly 3 times with a mobile stunner. This was done after stunning and bleeding and confirming that the pig was dead, of course. The stunner was placed on the middle of the carcass, and the response to this procedure was that the front and hind legs would move upwards and downwards. This was also the behavior that was used to train the algorithm, and then we compared the live observation of movement in the slaughterhouse with detections by the system. We had 2 sessions of studying signs of life before the scalding tank, 13 December 2023 and 31st of January 2024. In December, 10 carcasses were stimulated. They were stimulated 3 times briefly, and between carcasses a break of 90 seconds was kept to allow proper detection by the system. And by doing this, we had 100% detection of the 10 stimulated carcasses by the system. In January, we repeated these observations with 20 carcasses, again 3 times a brief stimulation, 90 seconds between carcasses, and again 100% of the stimulations were detected by the system. Then we also tried whether more subtle movements of the carcass would be detected. And with 10 carcasses we only stimulated them once, again with 90 seconds between carcasses, and in this case 9 out of 10 carcasses were detected by the system. So then we come to the discussion. For the use of the electrical prod, we saw that accuracy, sensitivity, specificity and precision were all above 80%, and the expected range would be between 70 and 90% for this type of indicators under field conditions. We have few studies available to compare with, as only 20% of slaughterhouse sensor systems have been externally validated, as recently pointed out in a review paper by Vogt and colleagues. We also looked at how the performance in our case compared with a chance model based on our data, and then we would expect an accuracy of about 52%, so the system performed well above chance level. For signs of life before the scalding tank, all the simulations were detected when the same protocol was used as for training the algorithm with a 3 times stimulation, and 90% of cases were detected with less stimulation, with only once stimulating the carcass. For these rare events, it is important to check, to have regular checks for the system whether it's still sensitive and working. So simulations like we conducted in this validation study can be very useful to check that the system is still sensitive and operational, because these events really need to be monitored correctly by the system. And so to conclude, for the 2 indicators validated, the AI for animals provides a valid solution for smart monitoring with all indicators over 82%. And additional benefits are observed from the mandatory evaluation of the footage by the slaughterhouse personnel. False positives can be used to improve the algorithm further. They can be shared with the developer. And true positives can be used by the slaughterhouse to take action, and also to formulate that they want to see, for instance, a certain behavior less in the future, or they want to ban a certain behavior. They can really make use of the system to change their performance in the slaughterhouse. And for use of the prod, this has already led to changes in protocol and to more detailed observations of the stunning area. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for listening. This validation study was funded by the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality. We'd like to thank Deloitte for providing the data from the AI for Animal system and for valuable information on the training of the algorithms. And I would also like to thank the participating slaughterhouse for allowing us to conduct this validation study. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Bas. There you are, perfectly on time. Thank you. So I'm going to jump straight to questions, and there's one from Eleanor Nallon. She says, thank you for the presentation. A good example of applied research involving NGOs and industry with the potential for improving animal welfare in concrete settings, which I very much agree with. What are your takeaways about the specific collaboration with other stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it's very important because it's also, for instance, also if you think about animal welfare labels, like the Dutch label, we have the Better Life label in the Netherlands, and then you also want to know that the slaughter day is done to in the best way possible. So if you have a system like this and you also are willing to share results, for instance, with the NGOs and discuss with them what are the optimal settings for their welfare label. You can also come to agreements together and then use the system to change the behavior of the personnel in a good way, or monitor indeed if the process is really of the quality that you would like it to be.
Yeah, sounds great. Are there any plans to require or give extra credit from the food labeling schemes for the use of this kind of system?
Yes. So NGOs see the value of this system, also because of this fact that it sort of monitors the process continuously. So you do see that NGOs are considering to advise the use of this type of system for slaughterhouses in their production chain. And I think that's a very good development.
Yeah, absolutely. A technical question from Beate Nielsen. You mentioned the stunner that you were using to detect signs of consciousness before scalding. Was that an electrical prod? And if so, could that cause the muscle spasms observed rather than the animal being conscious?
Yeah, so it was the emergency stunning device, so the high voltage stunner basically. And what it does to a carcass is that it really leads to contraction. So you see the legs go up and down. And this was also the behavior that you would want to detect in a pig that is not stunned anymore and that it has not been properly killed. So that's the behavior that comes as close as possible to the real life setting. And in a way, it's fortunate, of course, that we did not see pigs that were really still alive before entering the scalding tank. But it makes it difficult to validate the system for traits like this. It would be maybe preferable to have some footage of incidences where this did happen. But that was not the case in our study.
And a quick question for me about the use of the electric goad to move the animals. I think there are certain goads that actually measure whether they've been used on the actual goad device. So could you use one of those to train the AI to get better at detecting the use from the camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are indeed also systems that combine, for instance, video with RFID. So you can see also where the device is, and it's also good to realize that in our case we really focused on the human handling the prod. It was not used in all cases. Sometimes they would just hold it over the pig, and when the pig was moving, they did not use it. And the slaughterhouse was also encouraging the workers to use the prod less and less, and to see if they could find other ways to encourage the pigs to move forward. But indeed, it would be great, of course, if you can really monitor this behavior more precisely, and also monitor when it is used on the animal. This depends a little bit also on the angle of the camera, how close you are to the process. And we've also seen in our case that in the beginning, the camera was still more distant, so then the only thing that we could really record was this holding the prod. But in the current system, it's actually closer to the animal and the person, so you could do more detailed observations. And then, of course, you are more precise in linking the findings actually to animal welfare.
Exactly. Thank you. There's a question here from Joanna Marquez Herman, who says, great presentation. What do you think would be the implications of camera use in slaughterhouses for law and policy making?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So that's also something that the slaughterhouses and also the authorities are thinking about, struggling with, because potentially this type of system sees everything all the time, and slaughterhouses are, of course, also hesitant. So how does this work if we would share our data with the inspectors? There is more and more thinking about this. Should we have like a safe space to experiment with sharing this type of data? It does make a lot of sense, of course, once you have systems like this in place, that you also start making their data and their use available to all stakeholders involved. But then you do have to think about how do you, in the beginning, how do you handle things where you certainly can see, suddenly can see much more details than in the previous situation. How do you deal with penalties and things like that? So it needs a bit of thinking and discussion, I think, within the community. But there is a lot of potential for data sharing and for really making use of this type of systems.
Absolutely agree. Something that we'd be very keen to see some progress on. So thank you, Bas. I think we're almost at our intended time. So thank you very much for ending the conference on a really fascinating and impactful piece of work. So we're at the end of the fascinating 3 days of our conference. I'm just going to give a very quick wrap up. Stay around because there's a couple of things you might want to hear about. But first of all, I just want to say what a fantastic 3 days it's been. As usual, UFAW's conferences are an incredibly eclectic mix of species, scenarios, scientific approaches to animal welfare. And that's the way we like it, because we think that people have an awful lot to learn from each other about different approaches and different scientific methods and so on. So it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for all of you who've participated. Just a few things at the very end of the conference. We had a poster competition. If you haven't been to visit the posters yet, you can still see them, but we have chosen the winner of the poster competition, and the prize this year goes to this excellent poster, which the panel were very impressed both by the scientific content and the clarity and the quality of the graphics and so on, with the lead author of Marie Roche Pons. We'll be in touch with you to send you your prize, so congratulations on winning the poster prize. You can still visit the posters for probably a couple of months after the meeting, and you can still put questions to all of the poster presenters. So please do go and spend a bit of time visiting the posters after the end of this meeting if you have the chance. Please do tell us what you thought of the meeting. There's a short link there or a QR code. Tell us what you thought and what we can do better next time, and we'll email that to you as well. But we really appreciate all of your feedback. which really helps us improve these meetings in future. Once again, if you want to publish the results of your fantastic science that you've been telling us about for the past 3 days, or anything else that you're working on, please consider our journal Animal Welfare. As I said, its impact factor just went up 60% in a year, thanks to its wonderful editors, Bas, who you've just heard from, and my colleague Beate Nielsen. So please consider submitting something to the journal. We'd love to see your research published there. Lots of what we talked about might translate into changes in policy, and one of the best ways you can do to drive that change is to get involved in the policy making process yourself. So please do consider signing up for our seminar series on translating animal welfare research into law and policy. I think a lot of you would find it really informative, like I have. Understand a bit more about how we take our research and help it turn into policy that makes real world change for animals. We really hope to see you all next year, and to see as many of you in person as possible. We'll be in London next year for UFAW centenary. We were founded in London almost 100 years ago, so we'll be back at the University of London in summer 2026, almost certainly at almost exactly the same date in June as this meeting this year. So we hope to see you all in a year, and we'll get details about that meeting out to you very shortly. If you're not already, please consider becoming a member of UFAW. We'd really love to have all the scientists who are involved in this kind of research to be members of UFAW, and for UFAW to be the professional society that represents you and helps you do the work that you do. So we'd absolutely love it if you're not a member, if you consider joining, and we'd be delighted to welcome anyone who isn't already a member. And so that brings me to my very, very final slide, which is just to say my thank yous. Thank you to our sponsor, Charles River, who supported the conference and allowed attendance from lots of attendees from low and middle income countries who couldn't otherwise have attended. Thank you to the speakers for their amazing eclectic range of scientific presentations, which were of an incredibly high quality, as were the poster presenters. Thank you to all the session chairs who volunteered to chair sessions, which I know is quite a stressful job. So thank you especially to all of the non-UFAW volunteers who helped us out with chairing sessions. It's always much more interesting to have external chairs. So thank you to them. Thank you to everyone who attended, because there's no point putting on a conference without lots of you listening to all the exciting science. So thank you very much to everyone who came along, and a huge thank you to a really dedicated and big team of UFAW staff who made sure that this conference is a success behind the scenes. There's almost too many of them to thank now, but the name I need to pick out is Stephen Wickens, who has been running all the technology and battling the occasional internet gremlin in the background. None of this would work without Steve pressing all the buttons in the background, as you saw very briefly when his computer crashed earlier on in this session. So a huge thank you to Steve, to Beate, my colleague who chaired some of the other sessions, and everyone in the back office at UFAW who's been helping with this meeting. So that's a wrap for 2025. We'll see you all in 2026, and thank you so much.